Hey guys, Roxabox90 here with another how to build your EDH deck. So last time we talked about overall playstyles, aggro, control, and combo. So in this video we're going to discuss the aggro most popular deck styles and sub-themes. So one of the most popular that you will see of aggro playstyles, aggro being decks that put on a lot of threat, build lots of creatures, and overwhelm people, whether with lots of creatures or big powerful creatures. One of the most popular is tokens, token deck. What is a token deck? Basically, you make lots of tokens, and you can use them to chump block creatures. You can pump them up and use them as attackers, build a huge army. You can use them sacrifice fodder. So, for example, a card like Grave Pact on the side here says that whenever you creature controls you put in the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Remember, tokens, when they die, they first go to the graveyard, then they are exiled. So you can use that to punish people. So that's one example. You can use them for that. You can use them for many other things that require you to just sacrifice a creature to do something. So, for example, if you have a search engine like Survival of the Fittest, you have to tap one, sacrifice a creature. Well, if you have a token, just use the token. You can also use it as a forever engine into Skull Clamp, which whenever a 1/1's attached to it, since it gives -1, the creature dies and you draw 2 cards. So you can just feed it as a card drawing engine. You can have larger pump spell effects. So you can have things like Eldrazi Monument up there. So if you give your whole army that, they suddenly become ridiculously powerful, especially if you have other things like Elish Norn in play. And it also, you just have to sacrifice a creature every turn. With tokens, it's very easy to do that. So you have those sort of things. You also have engines that produce tokens, like Awakening Zone. You just make a token every turn. And if you have things like Parallel Lives or Doubling Season, it doubles those tokens. Decree of Justice, if you use an infinite colorless combo or anything, you can put Infinite Angels into play. And of course, Avenger of Zendikar, when it comes into play, you get 0/1 tokens for your lands, and then it boosts your plant tokens every time you play a land. Gave is one of the more popular generals in tokens. He's a token lord, the guru. There are other generals that people use. You have Teysa, Nath the Gilt Leaf, Savra, the Queen of Golgari, Azuri for elf token particularly, Riz the Redeemed, Ulash the Hatesea. These are all just examples of generals you can use. And the strength of tokens is that you just do lots of different things, give you lots of sacrifice fodder, and let you overwhelm people with enormous armies that can be fairly easily generated. The weakness of them is that sweeper spells tend to take down your entire infrastructure, which is why cards like Eldrazi Monument are so powerful, because they give indestructible. Green, white, and possibly black are the main colors for tokens. Another aggro-focused sub-theme is Reanimator. The concept behind Reanimator is you try to cheat by putting powerful creatures into your graveyard, whether through discarding effects, like Cabal Therapy is an example, or through things that search your deck and take things out and put them in your graveyard, such as Entomb, which searches for a creature, Buried Alive, which searches for 3. Demonic Tutor, of course, is a crux of these sort of things because it's an additional one of any of these in your deck. So you search and put a creature in your graveyard, and then you cheat it out using various Reanimator spells, whether they be the, of course, very classic Reanimate, Exhume, Animate Dead, Living Death. Generals tend to be more along the lines of Teneb, which his ability puts things from graveyards into play, or the Meneoplasm, which can take creatures from graveyards and make himself gigantic. Just a few examples of the large creatures you look for in your deck. Scourge of the Care Ridges, which is a future sight card that allows you for very cheap to do damage to a number of creatures without flying, or a lot of damage to creatures with flying. Chroma, Angel of Wrath. You have Shieldred. And Jin-Gitaxias is a very funny one to cheat out because in EDH people need their hands, and to get rid of their hands by playing him really early, while it's not a very respected technique, it does help you win the game. These, of course, are color. Remember, you're bound by color. Classic Reanimator decks aren't bound by color because you can have in your deck colors that you can never play. So if you're running a black-white, you can run Jin-Gitaxias. In EDH, you can't do that, so you have to keep that in mind. Look for the best sort of creatures this way for the colors you're running. Of course, black tends to be the large Reanimator color. Many people run blue if they're running Mimeoplasm because it gives them control so that they can counterspell things that would exile things from graveyards, which, by the way, is Reanimator's biggest weakness. If people use Graveyard Hate against you, they can easily exile the things you put in there, and then you're kind of in trouble because your creatures are hard to get out otherwise. So Reanimator's another very viable option if you're running aggro. Another aggro strategy you have is sacking recurring things. So this pretty much is a deck that uses the enter the battlefield, leave the battlefield abilities to either continuously sacrifice creatures and bring them back from the graveyard, or put something into play and bring it back to your hand and replay it over and over again. So cards that you see often used in this sort of strategy. Venser is probably the most popular Planeswalker because it is +2. Takes a creature out of play, brings it back into play. So whenever a creature comes into play, something happens, then he can abuse that ability every time. You have things like Mimic Vat. Whenever a creature dies, you can put it onto it and then reuse it. Grave Pact, whenever a creature dies, sacrifice. Then in terms of leaving play, you have things like Revulark and Archon of Justice, that whenever they leave play, something happens. So when they leave play, if you have ways to bring them back from the graveyard, Reanimator style, for example, then you can reuse them over and over to abuse their ability. You have things like Eternal Witness and Karmic Justice, that whenever it comes into play, something really good happens. So they work particularly well with Venser. It's because you put them into play and then they come back. You also have cards that do both. Solemn, when he comes into play, does something. When he dies, he does something. So you can really abuse him over and over again. Popular generals you have for this, you have Ten Up the Harvester, who can bring stuff back from your graveyard, so of course he's useful. And you also have the Ghost Council of Orzhov. Lets you sacrifice creatures in order to put him out of play and bring him back in, and he does damage. So you could just over and over reuse things and create engines. Black and white are obviously the bigger ones you use here. Sometimes blue and white. It really depends on what type of deck you're using. And you also have to be concerned that the biggest weakness to this sort of deck are cards that prevent your graveyard from activating. So things like Leyline of the Void that are heavy graveyard removal prevent you from doing this, as well as control decks that prevent you from, they counter your chain of reusing things. They can counter or bounce or remove things. So keep that in mind. Next we have Voltron. Unfortunately, I don't usually run Voltron. I don't have a lot of things for it, so I can't show a lot of examples. But Voltron is basically, you play your general as quickly as you can and try to do 21 commander damage as fast as possible. Remember, when your commander does 21 damage to an opponent, they die. If it's 21 direct from a single commander. What you want to do is you want to play cards like Lightning Greaves, Whispersoul Cloak, Sword of Body and Mind, Shield the Oversoul, Argentum Armor, various cards that give fast equipments, fast, powerful spells in order to make your general do a lot of damage really quickly. Rafiq and Finest Hour are perfect together. Finest Hour gives him another Exalted and gives you two attack phases. So if you do that when you have the Eldrazi Conscription on him, you basically win. So that sort of thing is what you try to do. You put multiple enchantments, multiple artifacts on a general, and quickly try to do your 21 commander. Biggest problem with this, of course, is that if somehow they remove your general, they tuck him into your deck, for example, your deck usually flounders and you collapse. This is why it's generally a 1v1 strategy, and much more difficult in multiplayer to pull off because of the amount of removal going on. But it's another major aggro strategy. Other generals you have besides for these two, you have Zur the Enchanter, Earl the Miststalker, Kemba Ka Regent. These are all just examples of generals that can be really devastating when you throw stuff on them. So that's another aggro strategy to go with. Another strategy you have in aggro is Infect. This is not a strategy I necessarily recommend, particularly in multiplayer, but in 1v1 it's very powerful, and you can use it in multiplayer too. It's not impossible. So the most popular general, of course, is Skithiryx the Blight Dragon. The flying, haste, regeneration, Infect make him a really nice evasion general, and also a very powerful Infect creature. You can go Voltron with a deck run by Skithiryx fairly easily. Generally in Infect, since you only have to get 10 Infect counters, not 20 in EDH, you can, hopefully if you can do the same damage to other people, or you can proliferate deck. Make a proliferate deck is also a rather viable strategy. Blightsteel, of course, being huge, hard to kill self, is an absolute obvious pick when you're dealing with Infect in EDH, because he's massive. And of course you try to, if you're running Voltron with Skithiryx, for example, and of course with other Voltron generals, you run things like Lightning Greaves, Boots, and Nim Deathmantle. All ways to help get through. And there aren't as many Infect, so often you have engines that you try to protect slash get your few Infect or proliferate stuff going. Biggest weakness, of course, is that with Infect, if in multiplayer, it's hard to do the damage you need to everybody, and there aren't so many Infect cards, so you really have to build other things around the Infect, and it often can be cumbersome. You can also substitute Glissa for Skithiryx if you'd like, because she has green and black as mana choice, but that's your own personal decision. So don't really recommend poison, but it is a strategy for aggro. And last up, sorry for the wide lens, I'll try to zoom in to give you guys some idea. Last up, you kind of have a combination of ramp and big mana decks. I'm kind of putting them in the same category because their idea is the same. Basically, ramping is you try to really up your mana base and your land count as quickly as you possibly can in order to play either very big spells or very big creatures extremely quickly. So classic things you see run in ramp decks. My Omnath deck is the reason I have so many examples, and I've played with it for a while. You have classics like Primeval Titan, he gets you lots of lands. You have Seed Guide Ash, gets you a bunch of forests. You have Skyshark Claim, 2 forests. Sakura Tribe Elder is very popular, gets you a basic land you need. Darksteel Ingot is indestructible, so that's really good for mass artifact destruction, so it leaves you with a land up. Cultivate and Solemn Simulacrum, Kodama's Reach, which and Cultivate are the 2 classic major ramp cards. So basically all sorts of those ramp spells quickly get you big scary things you need, such as, of course, you have things like Ulamog and Kozilek and Blightsteel, Colossus, and all sorts of massive big scary creatures. You also have the doublers, mana doublers. These are used since they tend to be artifact. They can be used in, of course, non-green decks. You can use them in black decks, for example, to run things like Exsanguate. So, non-black deck, you have Mana Reflection, which doubles mana. Cage Sun, doubles mana. Your mana production of a single color. You have Doubling Cube. Vernal Bloom is for green decks. Extraplanar Lens, and of course in green decks, Magus the Candelabra lets you use the doublers to double and double advantage. So popular generals for big mana strategies, you have, oh I'm sorry the lighting's a little bad. You have cards like Omnath, who's of course a big mono green one. You have Drana, allows you to give -0, -X to a creature and she gets X +0. So if you have mana doublers, lots of mana, it allows her to easily remove things. You have cards like Exsanguate, Banefire, Profane Command, are all examples of extra mana things you can use. Steel Hellkite is a good example. Other generals you can use besides for Omnath and Drana, you can use things like Akroma, Angel of Fury, you can use Kresh, you can use Geth, you can use Mile of the Anima, Azusa, Lost But Seeking. There's lots of mana ramp and big mana generals that you can use. So that is pretty much the discussion about aggro. These are the various sub-themes that fall under aggro. There probably are some more, and of course they can all overlap. You can have Voltron ramp, you can have all sorts of combinations of them. But these are kind of the overarching ideas behind the sub-themes of aggro. So I hope this video was informative for you guys. I hope it helps anybody who wants to make aggro-oriented decks. Feel free to subscribe up top for more MTG content. The previous videos will be on the upper right, and the next video hopefully will be upcoming soon. Control, which will be over here, and previous videos will be over here. So thanks for watching, guys. Feel free to comment below, PM me with any questions you have, and have fun deck building. Thanks for watching.